You are about to find out. How did the history of the Beijing-Taipei confrontation begin? What is the history of Taiwan and its people, including the Austronesians, Chinese immigrants, and European colonizers? How has the conflict between China and Taiwan been shaped by the involvement of great powers such as the US and the USSR, and whether Taiwan will achieve formal independence or remain a part of a unified China, with the situation maintained by the status quo established in the 1980s? How many China are there in the world? We give you 30 seconds for reflection, but it's better not to even try because no one can figure out this question for 50 years. Inside China, it's better not to raise this topic under any pretext. It is considered to be solely a matter for the Chinese there, but even in the United States, the situation will not become clearer because on the one hand, there is the Taiwan Relations Act of 1979 and the Taiwan Relations Enhancement Act of 2020. The Americans seem to think that there are two Chinas. But nevertheless, it is not that a visit or even a call from American officials to Taiwan is exceptionally rare. American corporations like Blizzard mercilessly fire and ban employees for any mention of Hong Kong and Taiwan in a negative way. While most videos on this subject start with the year 1949, we'll dig deeper and begin with the year 8000 BC. This marked the end of the Stone Age, better known as the Neolithic period. At that time, the Austronesians lived in what is now Fujian province of China. This group got its name from their language and was quite advanced for their times. They are believed to be among the first on the planet to invent the technology of the sail, and they also had a primitive form of paper. The Austronesians mainly engaged in agriculture and were quite successful. However, closer to the 5th millennium BC, they came under pressure from the more numerous Sino-Tibetan peoples, also known as Tibeto-Chinese, which led to the Austronesian expansion migration. First of all, as part of the expansion, the ancient people left eastern China and moved to Taiwan. It was not familiar to them because the first settlements of the Austronesians on the island date back to 8,000 years BC. Well then, thanks to their technological advancement, the Austronesians populated all of Oceania. Their descendants can be found in Indonesia, the Philippines, Polynesia, and even Madagascar. It is Taiwan that is important for us. And there, the Austronesians became the ancestors of the Aborigines of the island. As of 2020, more than 500,000 Taiwanese are considered direct descendants of prehistoric Austronesians. Up to the beginning of our era, China didn't care much for the island, but the Taiwan-Strait and the geography of the island couldn't let it go unnoticed. As early as the 3rd century AD, Taiwan is mentioned in Chinese chronicles as an island of barbarians. In 239, mainland China sent an expeditionary corps of 10,000 to the island. In 605, it repeated the operation and brought the Aborigines to the mainland, who were taught Chinese and used in negotiations. There is little reliable information from those times, but it is known that in the 7th century on the Penghu Islands and Taiwan itself, there were already villages founded by mainland Chinese and Japanese. The pirates of this country, as well as the Chinese, were very fond of exploiting no man's land in Taiwan as bases. However, it was a dangerous business. The natives of Taiwan were warlike people. They had a widespread custom whereby to prove their maturity in order to marry, the groom had to bring the head of a Chinese to the leaders. The Mongols who came to power in China in the 13th century were themselves not particularly opposed to violence, and during the Yuan dynasty, the Penghu Islands and part of Taiwan came under mainland control. A wave of migration from not particularly prosperous areas to the islands began. From then on, the inexorable process of pushing Taiwanese natives closer to the mountains began, while the most suitable land was occupied by mainland Chinese. It is the descendants of immigrants from Fujian and Guangdong provinces who make up the majority of Taiwan's population today. But before that, like most of the planet, they had to suffer because of the European colonizers. In 1517, the Portuguese sailed past the island and named it Formosa, which translates as beautiful. Well, the Dutch of the East Indies Company didn't wait long and China fell out of the equation of the islands, for which the Spaniards and Dutch fought. The Dutch won, but their full control of the island lasted only 20 years. Nevertheless, during that time they managed to remain in Taiwan's history. It was the Dutch who helped the Chinese migrants to displace the local Aborigines. And it was they who taught the Taiwanese to use livestock to work in the fields, as well as various fertilizers. Well, as the cherry on the cake, the Dutch left behind educated natives who can write, But do not get too excited. As in the case of the other colonies, the Europeans were mainly interested in profit. Therefore, revolts were common. By the way, this is the earliest case in history, when a colony was fully seized from Europeans, and the first documented case, when Taiwan was proclaimed an independent state. For the Ming dynasty on the mainland was succeeded by the Qing dynasty, the generals and residents who fled it and founded the Kingdom of Tungning on the island, which in Europe was called the Kingdom of Formosa. It did not live long. Already in 1683, the Manchus of the Qing dynasty, through the Dutch and sanctions, regained control of Taiwan. From then until 1895, the island was under the full control of mainland China. However, there were nuances here as well. First, the Qin Empire did not take Taiwan seriously, considering it a backwater of China. Second, a large part of the island's population remembered the traditions of the Ming Empire and had resisted the Qingais, who were considered invaders. Third, in the 19th century, the Opium Wars began. Britain did not like China's independence, and the fact that it did not particularly want to trade their opium. The country formed a coalition and quickly defeated the forces of the Qin dynasty, causing famine, destruction, and drug addiction in the country. And Taiwan was seen by Western powers as a perfect springboard for military and political action against China. The island's trade with Europe and Japan increased manifold, and when China came to its senses, it was too late. Nevertheless, the effort was good. Taiwan was made a full-fledged province in 1885. Through the efforts of Chinese government, the first railroad was built there, and the ports and infrastructure were repaired. Even today's Taiwanese authorities recall this period fondly. How the story would have continued, we do not know, because in 1884, China and Japan went to war. Japan won, and with the support of the West, took Taiwan. Although China did not recognize the terms of the treaty, for the Japanese the island was their first breakdown of the pen of colonial affairs, and within a couple of decades Taiwan has become the most advanced territory in Southeast Asia, with the exception of Japan itself. In 1895, there were 30 miles of railroads on the island. In 10 years, under Japanese leadership, there were 300 miles. Taiwan was electrified, new agricultural technologies were introduced, and by World War I, it was a world-class economy. So it was up to World War II, but it's worth mentioning that the Japanese governed the island as severely as possible. Even elections were a problem, where the Governor-General of Taiwan was chosen from the locals. However, before the Second World War, Japanese militarism took its toll. Taiwan was assimilated and even drafted into the Japanese army. You probably know how it ended. We can only add that many Taiwanese participated on Japan's side in the Nanjing Massacre and other war crimes. But most were still happy to return to China at the end of World War II. True, even there, it was not without mishaps. At the post-Damascus Conference, Japan was seemingly forced to give up Taiwan, but no peace treaty were signed until 1951. Even so, when the documents were signed in San Francisco, China was not even invited, and the country's rights to Taiwan were de facto cemented somehow, hanging the issue of the island's nationality in the air. It was not only documents and treaties that were in disarray. Since 1927, China's civil war had been raging. The Republic of China and the Chinese Communists were dividing territories and were the site of a confrontation between the great powers even before World War II. The Republic, for example, in the 1930s was supported by Germany and the Communists, of course, by the USSR. Because of the war with Japan and the subsequent World War, the Chinese had no time for internal strife. But as soon as the situation got better, the old disagreements returned. The Communists and Republicans, the second after Japan's surrender, began to frantically take over the cities and exercise to see who could seize more territory in order to claim legitimacy for their government. Mao Zedong won the civil war with the Communists, while Chiang Kai-shek and the Kuomintang evacuated to Taiwan, where they established a de facto dictatorship beginning in 1949. The first thing Chiang Kai-shek proclaimed was the establishment of the Republic of China on the island. The second was the imposition of martial law. It lasted a long 38 years and is considered the longest in history. Martial law went down in history as the White Terror, in which many thousands of Taiwanese were arrested, tortured, and executed on suspicion of collaborating with the Communist Party of mainland China. Total censorship was imposed on the island, strikes were banned, and Taiwan's defensive lines were actively built up. In the second half of the 20th century, there were several active phases of confrontation at once. In 1955, 58, and 95, it is a miracle that full-scale wars between the PRC and Taiwan did not start. The U.S. always played a decisive role in the events. Immediately after the Second World War, American specialists were engaged in economic reconstruction and investment. Wolf Ladajinsky carried out an excellent agrarian reform, which led to defeudalization and the establishment of market relations. Labor-intensive industries were growing as well, which the U.S. carefully covered with its military might. In 1979, the Taiwan Relations Act was passed, implying direct military support for the island in the event of a military clash with the PRC, and the Chinese representative at the UN was originally Taiwan's representative. However, along with formal support for the island, the great powers could not fail to notice China's growing potential. Mainland China took a seat at the UN in 1971, becoming the sole representative of the state. Since then, Taiwan has tried 24 times to challenge this and submitted its own application. But time after time, under pressure from mainland China, the application has been rejected. The U.S. rhetoric has also changed. Instead of unequivocal support for Taiwan, the so-called policy of strategic ambivalence came into play. On the one hand, America and its satellites support the island state. There are informal embassies and authorities of Taiwan in almost all Western countries. But on the other hand, no one formally recognizes them, and the U.S. officially recognizes the People's Republic of China as the only legitimate representative of the Chinese people. This gives rise to mishaps like the fact that in 2020, another act was passed to strengthen the U.S. relations with Taiwan. And on the other hand, the U.S. conducts all official negotiations with the PRC, forbidding its corporations to even mention the independence of the island. From time to time, the situation fluctuates to one side or the other, depending on current U.S.-Chinese relations. But the status quo established in the 1980s, give or take, has been maintained to this day. China is committed to the concept of a unified country, while Taiwan seeks formal independence. Some in the world support the position of one, some the other, and some are sitting on two chairs trying to get their own from both China and Taiwan. And there are a lot of things to get. Taiwan's economy grew at one of the fastest rates in the world, and now it is a paradise of semiconductors, electronics, and even nuclear power. Of course, the island's main trading partner is mainland China. Despite the fact that de facto Taiwan does not pay any taxes or contributions to the Chinese treasury, the turnover of mutual trade is growing year by year. At the same time, the democratization of society on the island is growing year by year. In 1987, martial law was finally abolished. The direct election of the president was held in 1996, and by the early 2000s, the position of the Kuomintang, which has ruled the island for half a century, had weakened. At the moment, tensions in the region are rising again, and the explanation of the current situation is already politics. Our business is history and the history of the two Chinas, which seem to be united and also seem not, we have told you. If you liked the video, we will be glad to receive your likes and comments on this topic. Bye, see you soon, my friends.